without further ado, welcome Rabbi Wineberg from Marais Road Shul, formerly from Santon Shul, to give us a fascinating lecture on reincarnation and do we really come back as frogs, monkeys, or apes?
I was going to say good evening, but with the wonderful sunny background behind you, Rabbi Afton, I have to say good morning. I'm not sure if you're in Australia, zooming from Australia at the moment, or if it's even morning in Australia, but we love your background. And I generally love your background. Rabbi Afton is not only a colleague, but somebody who I consider a friend. He's done a wonderful, wonderful job of lifting up Torah education in Johannesburg. You come from a background of educators, people who literally risk their lives for Jewish education. And we in South Africa have certainly benefited from you, like me, having put roots here. So that's shkoyach for doing that. The difference is you married a South African, so you didn't have a choice. Anyway, it's good to be with everybody. I see that we have a lot of friends, both from Cape Town and from Joburg. We even have shul members from Joburg who are living in Joburg, but they're members of our shul in Cape Town. And I even see Joel Schmuckler here, who I think just had a bris of his son this morning. Joel, Mazel Tov. If the name on your screen is correct and it's you behind that name, Mazel Tov. I don't know what the name that you gave your son, but you should have a lot of nachas. So all in all, really special to be here, and I really feel amongst friends. I wouldn't say that I have what to say about the topic. I would say that the Torah has what to say about the topic. And it is really a fascinating topic. And one that certainly bears examination and looking into a little bit. Certainly an hour or however long we're going to talk tonight isn't going to cover an exhaustive topic like reincarnation, like soul, and like all the other issues that really are come up as a consequence of this discussion. So I hope we'll touch on it in at least a comprehensive way that you get a sense of the Jewish perspective, the background, the controversies, and an understanding of the Jewish sort of approach. It's unusual for me to talk in such a forum. In other words, I'm used to engaging. I love questions. I love being interrupted and taken into your space. Obviously today that's not really possible with Zoom, but I would encourage questions on the chat, and I will try to look at them from time to time. Because of the nature of this medium of Zoom, I'm going to try and avoid visuals and all of that stuff. I want to talk to you. And I want you to talk to me. But in order to make it sort of, just give it a bit of movement, I want to actually break today's talk into 4 movements. The first one we'll call Let's Fly Away. The second one is the soul. The third will come to reincarnation. And then the fourth will finish with infinity. Okay? So first we're going to fly away. We'll deal with the soul. Bit of reincarnation, a touch on a bit of infinity, and hopefully by then you'll be schluffing. You'll thank me for a wonderful good night's sleep. Let's talk. When I say let's fly away, what do I mean? Well, you know, I'm a rabbi, so we begin with a story, with a tale. A fellow goes to the most sought after, hottest opera performance that New York City has seen in 2 decades. Tickets were sold out within minutes. They're scalping for hundreds and hundreds of dollars outside a week ago. A fellow comes, he's really chuffed, he's got his seat. And you know what opera lovers look like? No offense to any opera lovers on this wonderful program. And he's sitting there, and next to him is a lady with an empty seat. And he's quite intrigued. I mean, who would come on their own to a show that is completely sold out? So the whole time he's sitting there listening to the music and the singing and the hacking over there, and And he's thinking to himself, where's the other guy? What, did they break up? What happened? So he turns to her eventually at the intermission. He says, Madam, he says, I see you're enjoying the show. She says, absolutely. I'll never miss the opera. The Met, opera and the Met. He says, but can you tell me, you've got an empty seat. He says, I mean, couldn't you get somebody? He says, well, I'll tell you the truth. When I booked it for myself and my husband immediately. But unfortunately, my husband passed away. And so I had to come alone. He says, but madam, I'm sorry to hear about your husband passing away. Surely you could have found somebody else to come with you? She says, no, I couldn't actually. She says, because they're all sitting at the Shiva. Now, this story to me personifies the way we view death and the way we view the afterlife. We tend to tell ourselves, my loved one would have wanted me to do X. He would want me to go back to work. Shiva? He wouldn't want me to sit Shiva. A nechtigen tog, sit 7 days. My dad was a workaholic. If he knew I was going to sit for 7 days Shiva, he would go, he'd jump out of his box. He'd be turning over. He wants me back at work. You're telling me, Rabbi, I can't play music and during Shiva. I understand, but do you know how much my mother loved classical music? Do you know the pleasure it gave her? Of course I should listen to classical music in this time. And so on and so forth. What are we doing here? We are making the classical mistake of connecting our worldly experience with the otherworldly reality. When I say let's fly away, I mean that tonight we have to move away from the paradigms, from the metaphors, from the context within which we live, and step into a little bit of a different space. Because without it, we can't begin talking about the soul. We can't begin talking about reincarnation. We can't begin talking about the journey of life. We have to step out of it. Because that's where the soul really exists. What happens, let's talk about this very basically. What happens when we die? Now, it's never happened to me before. But as far as I understand from the good books, and the Torah teaches us, that death is the separation of the soul and the body. The separation of the soul and the body doesn't just mean that now the soul is sitting next door, sipping a pina colada, and the body's over here a little bit lonely. It's like, where's my soul? Separation of the soul and the body is a complete reality shift for the person. Before, the person was completely rooted in his physical reality. A soul invested in a body, which is the human experience, is living life through the body experience. But if your body has not eaten, you feel hungry, you feel weak, you feel distracted, your brain doesn't work well. When you work your machine too much, you begin to lose focus, you begin to get tired, you're exhausted, because your soul is living through the body experience of this physical world. And similarly, the body, which is engineered to make sure that it's self-preserved, that it's taking care of itself, is drawn after things that help or that make the body feel good on a physical level, on a cellular level, whatever level it might be. Being attacked over here. Thank you. So the body has a primary experience. The soul is attached to it, and that's how we live life. Until one day comes, and mitamol, all of a sudden, our soul is not experiencing through the body anymore. What's it experiencing through? Our soul has moved on to the world of spirit. And in the world of spirit, it is not going to experience things as the body would normally experience. That doesn't mean it doesn't want to experience as the body does. It does. It really wants to, because that's all it knows. Its entire conscious self has been an experience of the body. But it can't. It wants to be there, but it can't be there because it's not that world anymore. And I want to be very careful and clear that as we're flying away, we're not flying to the world of spirituality. I really don't like that word. It goes into the same dustbin as religion. It's another thing I can't stand personally. What is spirituality? We tend to think that anything that I cannot physically see with my own eye right now is spirituality. And is somehow sacrosanct because it gets the halo of spirituality. No, I'm not talking about spirituality. I'm talking about spirit. A world as opposed to the material, the tangible physical world that you and I inhabit, that you and I experience everything through. Take that physical reality out. What do you have left? Well, I'll tell you like this. I want to do a little exercise with you as we come to the end and we're about to fly away in our first act of this evening. Take it for a moment. I want you to think about something that you particularly enjoy, a type of food. Okay, so right now you're thinking about a type of food. It might be simply a hamburger. It might be a slice of pizza. Give 6 hours between those two, please. It might be something more sophisticated. Maybe you like brie. If you go to the ballet, by the way, you like brie as well. Okay, you're thinking about it. Now I want you to imagine it in your mind very clearly. This food is clear in your mind. Okay, now I want you to put it away for a moment, and I want you to think about a pink elephant. Are you with me? Pink elephant? Where did you put the food? Where did you put the food? Where is it? You put it away somewhere? I told you to put it away. Did you pick it up and put it somewhere? I would hope not. Because I'm giving you a thought. A thought is an ethereal experience. It's not physical. At least not in the way that we experience things. So when I say put it away clearly, you weren't like, Rabbi, how in the world are you supposed to put a thought somewhere? It's a figure of speech because we don't have another way to talk about a thought. So you say, I'm putting it away. Now I want to ask you another question. I see over here dear friends from Cape Town. Friends of ours, members of the Shul from Cape Town. And I'm looking at one particular one who has a child in Johannesburg. So this person lives just around the corner from me. We're probably 700 meters, not even 500 meters away from each other. Their son lives in Joburg, not far from the Linksfield Shul. So I want to ask you a question. Who are you closer to, me or your son? Now, in 100 out of 100 times, the person when I ask the question to says my son. Of course, that's not correct. If you're a linear mathematician, you're going to say wrong. You're actually closer to me. You're about 500 meters from me. Last time I checked, Joburg is a little more than 500 meters, even more 500 kilometers. So in other words, when I spoke and I used the word, which is a physical proximity term, close, what did you think of? You didn't think of physical proximity. You didn't measure in terms of centimeters and meters and kilometers. You measured in terms of emotion. And I don't take it personally that you feel closer to your child than you do to the rabbi. I get that. But the question was a physical one because we don't have another way to describe what is essentially a spiritual or a question of the spirit. And that's when I say fly away. Let's move away from what we are so familiar with. Let's understand that we're talking about an intangible that is real. And just because it's an intangible doesn't make it less real. But at the same time, I do want to ask that we consider and that we try to always, as the questions are going to come into your mind, ask yourself, am I still stuck on the ground? Am I in that theater during Shiva for my beloved husband? Because he would want me to be listening and watching the opera right now rather than sitting at home where he is, by the way, because he's not at the opera. A soul is not particularly interested. I hate to break it to you. It doesn't want opera. Broadway, maybe. The opera, definitely not. No, I'm kidding. So a soul is not interested in the opera. A soul is a completely separate experience. It has a completely different value system. And it wants you at home in Shiva. That's what our sages are teaching us. So if you're still stuck in the opera, try and get out of it. Let's fly away. Okay? I'm going to take a little bit of a break. I'm going to leave it for a moment. If there are any questions, I'm going to ask you to please put them in the chat. I'm going to wait a moment for questions in the chat before we move on to the next act of the soul. Okay. No questions. Fine. Then I guess it was very clear. Let's now move on to the next act. Let's talk about the soul. So what is a soul? The first thing we defined as a soul is that a soul is a reality of the spirit as opposed to the body that is a reality of the physical. That's the first thing we know. A soul is not material. A soul is spirit. But what is the soul? So the first thing I'll quote to you is a quote from the book of Job in scripture, in the section of writings, where God describes the soul as being a chelik eloka mimal. A soul is a part of the divine above, which is an extremely contradictory statement. As you'll see a little later, it's a very difficult way to actually describe anything as being a part of the divine. But that's how the scripture describes and defines the soul. A part of the divine above. The Alter Rebbe, in the important work of Tanya, adds the word mamush, which means actually. It is actually a part of Hashem. So here we suddenly discover that inhabited within yourself, and I'm going to come to reincarnation soon, but I think we need to have this background before we can get to reincarnation. Inhabiting within your consciousness right now is a part of God. And in English, you'll have one word for it, really. It's called soul. That's all. When you look in the Torah, you suddenly discover a whole host of words. The word for soul in the Torah takes on a number of forms. You have the word early on. You have the word nefesh. You have the word neshama. You have the word ruach. Later on, you'll find that you have the word chaya, which means life. And scripture also describes the soul as being yechida. I've given you 5 Hebrew words. We're not going to have time to go through them properly. But the Eskimos have a lot of words for ice, because boy, do they know ice. I had the privilege of driving up to Alaska in my youth, and you get to learn a lot of different types of ice. To me, ice is ice, right? To you, ice is ice. But to an Eskimo, a Sleptard, and an igloo, ice takes on a lot of forms. In Torah, the soul is a very important reality. And so there are distinguishing names depending on the levels of consciousness of the soul. The soul is not simply this ethereal sort of nebulous spark that we don't have a name for, so we call it soul. The soul is a living, breathing, multi-layered, conscious reality, a consciousness. And depending on what level of reality it's manifesting, that's the type of level that the Torah talks about. At the very bottom, you have a basic level of tactile, a soul, the nefesh, that feels, that wants, that can be connected into the body. At a higher level, you have the world of emotion. At a higher level, you have the world of intellect. Go higher, you have the power of will. And go even higher, you can't separate it from God. The soul is a multi-layered, multifaceted reality that slowly but surely develops the possibility of connecting to the body in this world. But when you feel something and when you think something, you're in 2 different worlds. And you'll reach 2 different conclusions. And you'll go in 2 different directions. The soul has both levels of consciousness. We consider intellect to be above emotion. That's why God created our head above our body. The body is a seat of emotion, subjective experience. The mind, which should rule the heart, is objective experience. It's a higher level to operate through the mind than to simply operate through the heart. And going higher than that, you step out of the body entirely, out of the physical experience or the conscious experience, and you go into the background of your operating system, and that is will. What do you really want? You don't know why you want it. You're sometimes not even aware that you want it. You're just going after it. But there's things that you really want. They're really important to you. You can sit with a psychologist on a couch for a long time to understand why you want certain things that you want. But you want them. And everything follows from there. That's what we call the subconscious. That's out of the human experience, the body experience. So the soul is a multi-layered entity, which is characterized by being ultimately a divine spark. And here is where we start to get interesting. Because God takes the divine spark, it comes from Hashem, and he puts it into each one of us. What happens with that divine spark when we die, when it separates from the body? Where does it go? What does it do? Where does it return? In the question of reincarnation is the focus of our topic today. Does that soul actually come back into this world? Why? What would be the rationale of that soul coming back into this world? Do we want that our soul should come back into this world? How does it manifest itself when it comes back into this world, if it does at all? So to understand that, we need to, let me just pause for a moment and reflect. We've spoken about moving away from the physical into a higher plane of spirit. And now we've spoken about the soul as being a divine spark, multi-layered, different levels of consciousness. And this divine spark is brought into us and gives us life on this earth. What happens when we die? Now, the fascinating thing is that the Torah doesn't really tell us. The 5 books of Moses has almost no discussion about the journey of the soul. The 5 books of Moses is focused on living in this world. It's not particularly concerned with the afterlife, not because it's not important. It doesn't talk about a lot of important Jewish principles, like Mashiach. You don't have expressed explicitly in the 5 books of Moses. It's not the focus of the 5 books of Moses. The focus of the 5 books of Moses, if you look in this week's Parshas, is how do we live on this earth? But the soul is a given, and the journey of that soul is important. What happens to your soul when it separates from the body? We know what happens to the body. Vu geit the neshama. Where does the soul go? Well, you know, Far Eastern thought has taught us for a very long time. It's very ancient. And Far Eastern thought has preached and taught that the soul essentially comes into this world to learn experiences. And eventually, when it leaves the body, it figures out what it hasn't learned yet. It comes back down on this wheel. It inhabits another body so that it can learn more experiences. That's very much Far Eastern thought. There are fabulous stories, by the way. If you look in the books like Many Lives, Many Masters, and other very interesting books about reincarnated souls ending up in different people's bodies with little kids knowing different languages. There's some really interesting stuff, especially in the Far East, which have been documented, which point to this type of reality and point to this type of action, that this thing exists, that somehow souls seem to like come back down and then live in somebody else's body, or even sometimes in another life form, but we'll talk about that soon maybe. What is the Jewish perspective on reincarnation? And I want to be very careful that we're not using the word resurrection. People often confuse them. Reincarnation is not, resurrection is that a person dies and eventually is resurrected with Mashiach. The body comes back alive. That's one of the 13 principles of faith, that all those who died will return to life with the coming of Mashiach at a certain point in that process. That's not what I'm talking about here. Here we're talking about the soul. Does the soul get recycled? Does it come back down into another human being? What happens with the soul when a person dies? So one of the most important thinkers and teachers in Judaism is the Rambam. On his tombstone in Tiberias is inscribed the words, his name was Moses, the son of Maimon. And it says on his tombstone, from Moses unto Moses there arose none like Moses. You tell me somebody else that has such an epithet on their tombstone. That's pretty impressive. That's pretty good. This Maimonides, who lived about 800 years ago, is considered one of the most important teachers in Judaism. He goes through in his Mishnah Torah, the entire Torah. And he talks about philosophical ideas, and he talks about faith. Everything, he covers everything. And Maimonides tells us that the idea of reincarnation to him is silly. It makes no sense. And unless somebody showed him a source in Torah, he completely rejects the idea of reincarnation. So friends, that answers the question. And now you can all go to sleep. Maimonides quite clearly disavows Judaism from reincarnation. But clearly that's not the end of the story, because if that were the end of the story, well, it would be a short question. Is reincarnation Jewish? No. Can I go back to my pina colada? Clearly there's more to it. You want to hear more, and I'm going to give you more because it gets interesting. I remember in Sandton Shul, there was one Yom Kippur when the chief rabbi, Olav Shalom, Rabbi Harris, came to the shul, and they break the fast. He was sitting with some other members of the community, and they got into the topic of reincarnation, and they were talking about reincarnated souls, and he had a way of getting excited, and he rejected it out of hand, and it became a big tumult, and he said, it's not Jewish, how can you talk about it? Da-da-da. Okay, well, he can open up a Rambam and say, look, the Rambam says, forget about it. And yet, one of the most important teachers after the Rambam, chronologically, lived a few years later, was the Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman. Whereas Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon was born in Spain, in Cordoba, and died eventually in Cairo and is buried in Tiberias, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, the Ramban, was born also in a Spanish kingdom over there, and eventually made his way to Israel. And Ramban is considered one of the most foremost teachers with a commentary on the entire Torah, and so on and so forth. The Ramban clearly adopts the idea of reincarnation as an understanding of a lot of verses in the Torah. A lot of Talmudic passages are explained through reincarnation, and he accepts it as a part of Judaism. So what happened between the Rambam and the Ramban? Well, let me jump away from this epic battle between the two Rambans, basically a constant difference between them. Let me move away from that for a moment. Let's talk about it. What would be the problem with reincarnation? What is the issue with reincarnation? Why would anybody have a problem with reincarnation? It sounds so lovely. You had one chance, it didn't work out, you come back. No. Rambam says that's ludicrous. Why is he saying it's ludicrous? There is a fundamental issue theologically in Judaism with how I explained reincarnation earlier. One of the principles of faith, or principles of Judaism, I should say, that Maimonides implies in his principles of faith, is the idea of reward and punishment. It's one of his principles of faith, that God rewards those who do good things, and that God punishes those who sin. This is at the heart of the real partnership that you and I have with God. That our choices are free, we make them, and we live with their consequences. We don't live with their consequences in this world. We live with their consequences in a real world, in a world of eternity, a world of spirit. That's really where we see their consequences. You have all asked yourself the question, why do good people suffer? And the reverse of the question, why do bad people have such a great time? Clearly, this world does not mete out reward and punishment in the linear way you and I would calculate it. And that's because it doesn't end with this world. And Maimonides tells us that reward and punishment is something that happens to the soul after a person leaves this world, where their life can now be summed up, can now be reflected upon, and God in his infinite wisdom weighs up the deeds of man, and I say man in the generic sense of the species, and in weighing them up, either rewards them for the good or has to punish them for the bad. Without this, Judaism is simply another mindless, meaningless exercise. There's no value to what I do if I have no consequence to my action. or if I have no choice in my action. So here comes the problem. If that is indeed true, then how can it be that my soul, living a lifetime here of choices, then goes upstairs and says, oh, you were bad, don't worry, I'm going down, I'll try again. That means that my life had no inherent value. And I know it makes us feel good. It's wonderful to think, you know what, I'll mess up now. Come back in a few weeks, I'll get it right. It sounds nice, it feels good, but it's devastating, because what it means is that inherently your life this time around has no meaning. It's going to get blanked out like that Etch-a-Sketch. You know, you pick it up, gone, try again. This is the exact contrary to the principle, the absolute fundamental principle in Judaism, that your life matters and that your decisions actually make a difference. It is inconceivable that you will not get the reward that you should get for your life on this earth. And by the way, everybody gets the reward. Every Yid does tshuva. Every Yid has a beautiful, beautiful soul. Yes, it covers over with a little bit of schmutz and dirt. And yes, we do tshuva and we mess up again and we do tshuva again. But the bottom line is that it goes through a cleaning process. It can end up in a beautiful space in heaven. You want to come back down here again? A nechtiken talk, as they say in the classic. So this is a very important theological problem. We cannot accept reincarnation if it abolishes the basic premise of the value of your act, reward, and punishment. And this is clearly what bothers Maimonides. And therefore Maimonides does not say it's against the Torah. He says if I were to be taught it, I would have accepted it. But it doesn't make sense to me. That's what he says. So now we need to share with you something that has a difference between Rambam and Ramban. And the difference is as follows. The son of the Rambam was a man by the name of Rabbi Avram. Rabbeinu Avram ben Harambam writes that his father did not have a Kabbalistic tradition. You know that the Zohar, which is the primary work of Kabbalah, was written by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the 2nd or 3rd century, and it eventually slipped away. We lost it for a few hundred years. In the time of the Ramban, the Zohar was found again by a Moses de Leon, and it was spread around and became again the primary text as it had been earlier of Kabbalah. The bottom line is that Kabbalah needs a tradition. Kabbalah, the word Kabbalah means a tradition. The Maimonides, who learned from his teachers, and he lists his teachers in his introduction to his work, and how they trace all the way back to Moses. He didn't have a Kabbalistic tradition. He learned the laws of the Torah. He learned the philosophies of the Torah. He learned the allusions of the Torah, but he was not schooled in Kabbalah. Something he picked up later in life, his son writes. On the other end is the Ramban. The Ramban was very much schooled in the Kabbalah. There is a fabulous story that he writes. He writes it about himself, that his teacher wanted to teach him Kabbalah and he wasn't interested. I'm making a very long story short. And the Ramban eventually refused, and his teacher was caught violating a curfew in Girona, Spain. It was an anti-Semitic curfew. And they basically tortured him, and they were going to burn him at the stake. And on a Friday afternoon, they burned him at the stake. They burned Ramban's teacher. That evening, Ramban is sitting in the Shabbos table singing a Shechayil, or whatever you do at a Shabbos table, and there's a knock on the door. He opens the door, it's his teacher. This is what we call a very cool party trick. He watched his teacher being burned in an auto da fe in public in Girona, Spain, by the Christian church, by the Catholic Church. And that evening, his teacher knocks on his door. He lets him in, he says, what's going on here? After he recovers from his shock, his teacher says to him that he prayed to Hashem not to allow him to be killed because he had not taught the Ramban Kabbalah. And so God allowed him to use the wisdom of Kabbalah to create a goylem, to create some sort of humanoid who would be burned at the stake and allow him to flee. And he says, and now I'm telling you, your life's purpose is to learn Kabbalah. But let me tell you, the Ramban was pretty convinced by that trick. And his teacher taught him the wisdom of Kabbalah. And he uses it in a fascinating way in his commentary in the Torah. So therefore, the Ramban has a tradition of Kabbalah. And the Ramban clearly affirms the idea of reincarnation as a Jewish principle and precept. Fast forward a few hundred years and go to the most important Kabbalist of our time, the Arizal. The Arizal lived in the 16th century in Israel, in Tzfat. He came from Egypt. His name was Yitzchak Ashkenazi. And the Arizal became the most important Kabbalist of the last 1,000 years, bar none. His influence in Judaism is immeasurable in every facet. He is one of those unique sparks. And the Arizal has an entire book called Shar HaGilgulim, the Portal of Reincarnation, where he discusses reincarnation at great length. So we have just spent a few minutes talking about answering this question, is reincarnation Jewish? The answer is yes, but not the way you think. The Arizal teaches us in Shara Gilgulim how reincarnation works in Judaism. What is reincarnation in Judaism? And here we come back, or we come forward to the idea of the infinity. When we talk about the soul being a divine spark, it's a very important idea. What does it mean to be divine? To be divine means to be infinite. To have a divine quality is to have an infinite quality. And when you start going into the world of infinity, you are talking about a completely different reality, right? If you start thinking about infinity as a number, which is closer to infinity? A quintillion, which is, by the way, a very big number that my son taught me. He likes maths. A quintillion or zero, which is closer to infinity? The answer is they're equally close and distant from infinity. Because infinity is not simply zeros and ones. Quintillion is a lot of ones adding up to a quintillion. But infinity is not a lot of ones. You can't add to infinity by adding a lot of ones. It's a completely different paradigm. You're no closer to infinity with quintillion than you are with zero. You're no closer, because infinity is not something that you can divide with a number. It can't be divided at all. This is the quality of infinity. So infinity, or as Hasidus says, that etzem, when you're dealing with an essential quality, with an essential property, it can't be divided. So let me give you two examples of this in our world, and maybe three, briefly. And then we'll talk about the soul and understand the idea in Judaism of reincarnation. There is, and I'm not a mathematician, my son is quite a mathematician, but I'm not. But in mathematics, there's an area called geometry. A very high level of geometry is called fractal geometry. It's really theoretical stuff. There is in fractal geometry, which deals a lot with also the shapes and with certain like computer, generated stuff. There is a set, a geometric set that was developed by a man by the name of Mandelbrot. French Jew, worked for IBM. He created this set called the Mandelbrot set. I see some nodding heads. He must be an engineer or something. And the Mandelbrot set is a geometric shape that is called mathematical infinity. It is basically, it creates a image, a geometric shape. And what makes it infinite is that whenever you zoom into any part of the shape, you see the whole shape. This is a bit mind-bending, because you can't imagine that. Zooming to my face, you're going to see a nose very quickly. But you're not going to see my whole face, because you're seeing a part of it. But in fractal geometry, when you go into the Mandelbrot set, and maybe some of you are Googling it, you can play with this if you want, it's fun. It's amazing. As you zoom in, you get the whole thing again. Wherever you go, you get all of it, not a part of it. This is the idea of infinity. Wherever you are, you have it all. Okay? I'll give you a fascinating example. This is not scientific in the sense that I'm aware of, but this is more a little bit anecdotal. When Israel, in 1967, managed to go into the Sinai desert, the chief rabbi of the army was a Rabbi Goren. And Shlomo Goren went into Sinai Desert, and he came back with a very interesting souvenir. He came back with a rock that comes from the Sinai Desert, which is called the burning bush. The local herders, the nomads who are indigenous to that area, call this rock the burning bush. Why? Because the burning bush has in the vein of the rock, it looks like a bush. You can imagine a bush. Now, that's not interesting in itself. What's fascinating is that any way you split the rock, you'll always get the exact same image. Not a part of the image, not a side of the image, not a fraction of the image, the whole image. It's a bit surreal. And I actually, when I was studying this stuff, I actually mentioned it to my grandfather of blessed memory, and he said, yes, he saw the rock. He visited Shlomo Garin. My grandfather was the Rebbe's ambassador at large, and he visited Shlomo Garin shortly after the Six-Day War, and Shlomo Garin showed him this rock. And it's an amazing thing. Wherever you chop it, obviously you can't chop it for everybody because you get nothing left. But wherever you chop the rock, you see the whole vein of the rock shows the exact same image. How does it do that? This is infinity. It's something you're playing with that we don't really understand. I'll give you a final example within our world that is maybe a little bit of this idea. And it's not only infinity, it's spirit. It's when you're getting into beyond physical. You're getting beyond physical. You start touching this type of reality. Look at fire. Fire is the most spiritual of all physical properties. What is it? You can't hold it, you can't contain it. You can't put it in a box. Fire, it moves, it doesn't sit, it's not inert. But the amazing thing with fire is that you can share of that fire infinitely. It never runs out. You never get a part of the fire. Whenever you get fire, you get the whole fire. So I don't know if it's exactly the same idea, but it certainly does illustrate this idea that when you're touching at a certain essential level, you're dealing with things that do not divide. Now come back to the soul. The soul is a divine property. It's a part of Hashem, and you see why it's a problem to say part of. You can't get a part of infinity, because when you have a part of it, you have all of it. The neshama is not something that can simply subdivide. When you divide a neshama, a soul, you don't end up with two halves of a soul. You end up with two entire souls. Otherwise, we always say under a chuppah that the husband and the wife, the bride and the groom, are two halves of a soul. If they were two halves of a soul, then one would have one hand and the other guy would have one hand. One would have a half a brain and the other would have another half a brain. Most women say their husbands don't have any brain. The bottom line is that the idea when the soul subdivides, each one contains a complete composite of that soul. What is the composite of a soul? Tells us the Arizal like this. God sent the soul into this world with one purpose: to serve Hashem through observing the 613 commandments. That's why we're here. You can't keep mitzvahs in heaven. You can't give tzedakah in heaven. You can't be kind in heaven. You can't put on tefillin in heaven. You can't keep Shabbos in heaven. That's below. That's the work we do here. Our job is to fulfill the 613 mitzvahs. However, in the observance of the 613 mitzvahs, it is actually impossible for somebody to fulfill all of them. Some because of circumstance and some because just not practical. And so a person fulfills some of them, some more than others. Everybody fulfills something uniquely. You know, we're taught about the son of Yitzchak, Esav. He was a wicked guy. Esav's a bad oak. But Esav had a very unique quality. And by the way, according to many opinions, Esav was a Jew. His parents were Yitzchak and Rivka. Same like Yaakov. Esav had one very good quality. He honored his father remarkably well. He was devoted to this mitzvah of honoring a parent. It's one of the 10 commandments, a big one. He honored his parents. He honored his father particularly. And this was his unique mitzvah. The Gemara, the Talmud and Megillah has a series of little stories where it asks, constantly asking this question. Sages are asking other sages a question. They asked the son of Rava, one of the great Talmudic sages who lived in Babylonia, tell me, what was your father particularly careful with? Which mitzvah? He said the mitzvah of tzitzis. And they ask another one, what was your father particularly careful. He says mitzvah of Shema. Each one has another mitzvah. The Arizal says this is the weirdest conversation. We're talking about the greatest sages of Jewish history. They were careful with every mitzvah. What did he put on tzitzit but didn't worry about the yarmulke or tefillin? He did everything. What type of question? How is this even a legitimate question to say, what was your father particularly careful with? What mitzvah? We want to understand your father. Says the Arizal, look at the word in Hebrew. To be careful in Hebrew is zahir. And zahir means in Hebrew to shine. They were asking, with which mitzvah does your father shine? Everybody has one mitzvah. One unique mitzvah, which is their conscious self. That relates to that mitzvah, and they perform that mitzvah with a tremendous effort. And maybe they're challenged in that mitzvah, but that's their mitzvah. So the question they were asking is, of course they're doing all the mitzvahs. Rava, the great sage Rava, performed all the mitzvahs. According to the Gemara in Shabbos, he was hungry. He didn't have a meat. He made a cow through the power of Kabbalah, and he ate it on Shabbos. You're telling me that he sinned somewhere along the way? He was too lazy to daven Ma'ariv? No. But with which mitzvah did he shine? Each one of us has one facet through which we live our life. One element of our consciousness that becomes our conscious self, through which we perform our mitzvahs. It is the portal to all others. What about the other 612? For that you have to come back down again. For that you come back down so that you can fulfill the other mitzvah and live consciously through another prism and fulfill another mitzvah properly. Now you'll say to me, wait a second, Rabbi, didn't you tell us you can't go up and down? If you go up and down, where are you getting the results of your reward for your life in this world? I'm looking at a Michael Felton and a Lawrence Snitcher and a Jason Sandler and a Ken Lazarus and a Pinky Sarelli. I'm looking at you and you living life here. Your soul is living in this world now. If it comes down again, it's not going to come down another Pinky Sarelli. I would love that, by the way, Pinky. But you know what I mean? We get one chance. That's life. So what happens to that life if I come back down? But we have to remember what a soul is. It is infinite properties. So yes, I have lived through the prism of one mitzvah, one conscious state of being. The me, the I. I point here, I can point here, point wherever you want. It's me. It's the totality of the self. That part never comes back down, usually. That part stays in heaven, goes through its process and finds its peace. But another part of your soul, which is a complete composite of the soul, because there's no halves and quarters in an infinite property, that part comes back down. It has a soul relationship to you. You share the same root soul, but it's a completely new consciousness. It's a completely new human being. And that soul lives its life and hopefully perfects a part of itself and then returns. And so the next one. And they return back to a root. In heaven, they're connected. Often they're families. We often have problems with our families. Don't we have problems with our families? Because we're one part and we're bumping up against each other all the time. Because our soul root is shared and it's part of our journey in life to learn to actually manage together. So the soul can keep coming down, but the you part, or really the I part of your soul, doesn't come back down. And this is what the Arizal teaches. This idea, this wisdom is it's subtle. It has a certain sense of what I'm looking for. The bottom line is that it gives us, it's nuance. That's what I'm looking for. It's a nuanced view. And when you take a nuanced view like that, you start understanding that yes, your part of your soul will come back down, but don't think you're simply going to get another chance at the wheel. You're getting another chance at the wheel. You live your life once, get it right this time. You can't simply come up above, get the realization of how you should have lived and say, okay, I'll go back down and do it right. No, it doesn't work that way. You had your chance. Rabbi Wineberg gave you this year. You should have listened. By the way, Rabbi Wineberg has to give himself this year, and he should also listen to it. Because we have one chance at life. One chance to do it right. The beauty is that you can change your life in 1 second. That's the beauty and the power of this world. It's another discussion, but we are able to completely reform our life in an instant. in this world, not in the next. In the next, you get all the wisdom, you can't do anything about it. So, but you don't simply come back down again. So what I've done now, and I want to speak about another form of reincarnation for a few minutes, running out of time. And by the way, there's been no pauses, no questions, no interruptions. I've been talking straight. I think I deserve a coffee over here. So, so let me just review a few points and then try and go into a bit of the fascinating sort of aspect of reincarnation. First of all, we're dealing with a soul which moves ourselves away from the physical property and moves into the world of spirit. A soul is a part of the divine, and as a part of the divine, it has infinite properties. The Rambam Maimonides did not have a Kabbalistic tradition, not till much later in life. And his view of the soul is more Aristotelian. It's about spiritual versus physical. Not the idea of godly spark and the infinite properties is not how the Rambam saw the soul, necessarily. So therefore, the Rambam talks about the general idea of reincarnation being a revolving door, and he says, no, you don't get recycled. You get one chance at the wheel, get it right, or you'll have to deal with that in the next world in a much more acute and interesting fashion. That's it. You don't come back down again to try again. No such thing. No, sorry. Remember those games inside the Coke bottles, inside the rubber, you used to take it out and see if you won a prize. It said, sorry, try again. You don't get that. Do they have that in South Africa? I grew up with that. Used to take out the little rubber things and see if you won a prize inside a Coke bottle. Yeah, you don't get those sorry, try again in heaven. You come up there, you've lived your life, you deal with the consequences, and you find your peace. That's life. But a part of you will come down because your soul has infinite properties. It's generally divided in 613 parts. And our role in life is to perfect every one of those 613 parts. What gets the mind going a little meshuggah is that, remember, because it's infinite, every one of those infinite parts is made up of 613 parts, which in turn is made up of 613 parts ad infinitum. But we don't come back down. The you part of you, the conscious self of Maurice, bleibt in heaven. And that's exactly where it wants to be. Another part of your soul will come back down, live a life, and perfect another part of who you are, ultimately trying to perfect all 613 aspects of the soul and finding its rest. There is another aspect of reincarnation. The Arizal talks about it, and it's quite fascinating. You know the story of, by the way, my son-in-law's giving a shiur behind me in another room. Is it disturbing you? No, okay. I just don't agree with what he just said. No, I'm just kidding, man. I just hear his voice. I thought maybe it's coming through the speakers. That's fine. You know the story of the guy who's walking along, and he's walking through a creek, and his little voice says, "Hey, you, come over here." Looks around. What's calling him? Finally, he sees a frog. A frog sitting there. The frog says, "Hey, pick me up." Picks up the frog. Frog says, "Listen, I'm actually a beautiful princess. I was a witch cast a spell, and I ended up sitting here. If you kiss me, I'll turn into a beautiful princess for you." The guy says, "That's fascinating." He takes the frog, he puts it into his pocket. The frog says, "Don't you want me to become a princess? Kiss me, I'll become a princess." He says, "Nah." He says, "I'd rather have a talking frog." So the thing is like this. We do find a lot of references in the Talmud to people ending up in different life forms. People end up reincarnating and living in a different life form. And the Arizal deals with this. It's a subject on its own, but just very briefly to touch it because it is fascinating. The Arizal explains as follows. That we have a statement in the Talmud that says that the fires of Gehenna, fires of hell, cannot affect the righteous. But that's a problem, because the righteous person still may have done something wrong. We're talking about a very deeply righteous person. We're not talking about somebody that 51% more good than bad, and he sneaks into heaven by the skin of his teeth. We're talking about a tzaddik, a person of deeply righteous qualities. The fire of hell can't touch him. A person who has lived a godly conscience, but he has made mistakes. He's missed opportunities. He's not perfect. King Solomon says there's nobody perfect on earth who lives and doesn't sin. So there's some corrective process that he has to go through. But the Talmud says that the fires of Gehenna don't affect him. He can't be, he's impervious to the fires of hell. What that means is another thing. There's no actual boiling pot. There's no cauldron. There's no devil with horns, and there's no fire, but it's a spiritual entity. Those fires of hell can't affect him. So what happens? How does he find the perfection? Says the Arizal that this soul will have to be reincarnated into a lower living form. And in that living form, it will go through a corrective process to correct the thing that it erred or that it missed out on. And once the soul has gone through that emotional sort of psychological breakthrough, it goes back up into heaven. The fish dies or the animal dies. It goes back into heaven and it lives its life in pure bliss. It wants to go through this because it wants to get into the beautiful, pure space of heaven without any impediment. But what type of animal will it come down to? To come down into an animal, to go through the anguish of shchita and so on is not good. So God will reincarnate, says the Arizal, the righteous into fish. Fish do not have shchita. Their death process is much more sort of peaceful. And they belong to the water. When you take them out, they essentially die. He says that the souls of the righteous will be reincarnated in a fish. Now, let me tell you something. It's a well-known thing that Kabbalists and many of the Hasidic masters would eat fish with their fingers, not with a fork, so as not to pierce the fish and the soul that may have existed in that fish. So this is a Kabbalistic idea that actually, if you go to a Tish in Jerusalem, you'll see sometimes that the Rebbe, the Hasidic Rebbe, is eating fish with his fingers, not with a fork. It's not because in Eastern Europe they didn't have forks. It's because it's a Kabbalistic idea that you don't pierce or cut fish when you eat it. It's another discussion. But that's one idea. The other idea, and this is more common. On the other spectrum, you get such wicked people that they are so wicked that the fires of Gehenna or the ice of Gehenna, whatever the particular corrective process they need, won't change them. It won't help them. They're too far gone. So what happens to them? The very wicked can't simply go through most of us, we all go through some sort of corrective process. We have to realign and go through a complete reality shift after we die. It's not simple. It's a journey. We get there. What happens to the person who's so wicked that you burn him in the fires of hell? It's not going to fix him. He's too far gone for that. That individual will have to come back down. And they will come back down into a reality that is similar to the way they live their life in this world as a human being. For example, he says that a human being who engaged excessively in the pursuit of the sins of the flesh and was completely obsessed with a sex obsession, as we would call it in our day and age, that person will come back down as a rabbit. Their soul will inhabit a rabbit. And they'll be conscious, they'll be aware that they're inside a rabbit. And they will deal with the purely reduced reality of going through an intense pursuit of this type of behavior. And eventually it'll sort of be, it becomes so silly and so useless and so mechanical that eventually they get rid of it in their soul. The stain gets, and then they can go back to heaven, deal with the fires of hell, and go into heaven. So one of the Hasidic Rebbes, the Oyev Yisrael, said that an arrogant person comes down as a bee. He was saying a little bit tongue-in-cheek. Comes back down as a bee. Why? Because an arrogant person a whole day says, Ich bin, Yiddish. Ich bin, I am. Every sentence begins with I. Ich bin. In Yiddish, bin is a bee. So the whole day he's saying, I'm a bee. You come back down as a bee till you get out of your system. That's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek. But the point is that a person who acted in an excessively negative, obsessive behavior in this world, then you can't just simply go through a process. If you haven't corrected the behavior below, and done tshuva for it and regretted it, resolved not to do it again, and so on. If a person dies with that type, you can't just go into heaven. Heaven, it doesn't, it's gonna be, you can't get in. So you got to come back down into another life form that mirrors that act. And then living in that reality, it beats it out of the soul, so to speak. And then a person becomes released from that addiction, from that obsession, and then they can go through a process of cleansing. So this is another form of reincarnation that is considered to be very extreme and unusual. But in extreme cases, either for the righteous on one side or lahavdil for the wicked on the other, there is a form of temporary revisiting the world in a lower life form, and eventually coming back into a heavenly space. So I think I've covered enough for tonight. There's a lot more that we could talk about. I hope I've addressed the question of is reincarnation Jewish. I hope I've answered the question a little bit of the journey of the soul. And it gives us a little bit to think about in terms of the choices that we make and the journey that we want our soul to take after eventually 120, as they say. What attachments are our soul going to have? What addictions? What things does it have to rid itself of? What areas are we perfecting? What are we particularly shining in? How do we find other areas to shine in? And in this way, to have a better understanding of this very fundamental question. I'll take some questions now if Rabbi Afson is around and he wants to moderate the questions. Otherwise, I will just look at the chat.
Around. I see one question was about non-Jews. Did you see that question? Yes.
Okay, I'm seeing it now. It took one of my congregants, Rabbi. You see what I deal with, Rabbi Afson. It's good to hear from you, Aubrey. And the question is, do non-Jews have souls from our God? The answer is yes, of course. A soul ultimately is going. Everything comes from God, and life is a godly, quality in and of itself. Life giving is a godly quality. The question is, does it come from the divine quality of the infinity of God? That's another question. And that, I wouldn't say that even the nefesh of a human being doesn't really come from of a Jew doesn't come from the infinite qualities. It's the higher subconscious levels that would come from the infinite properties of Hashem. And that we don't say that a Gentile necessarily has the same soul. However, interestingly enough, Maimonides, coming back to our good friend Maimonides does write that he defines, there's a lot of statements in the Talmud about Jews and Gentiles. It's not a Jackie Mason joke sheet, but there's a lot of comments about Jews and Gentiles in the Talmud. But Maimonides does distinguish, and he says that when a soul of a Gentile accepts, when a person, Gentile, accepts 7 Noachide laws and lives a decent life based on faith in God, that individual merits the world to come. So that person does have a godly spark, absolutely. In a similar way to a Jew. The thing is that he doesn't have the same role as a Jew. A Jew has a lot more they have to perfect. The development of the godly spark in a Jew is 613 facets. In a Gentile, it's 7 facets. When a Gentile fulfills those roles, he goes into the world to come. He has a much easier ticket to heaven. We got the shorter end of the stick. If you think about it in terms of responsibility, we have a lot more that we have to do in order to get into heaven. But a Gentile can and does have a soul from Hashem. It's called Chsidei U'Masailam. And generally today we consider the Gentile world to be of this genre of Chsidei U'Masailam. Okay? Lauren, you want to ask a question? Can they unmute, Rabbi Afton?
No, I unmuted them.
You unmuted them.
Yeah, Rav.
Yes.
Alan, so by definition, the soul is good because it's an aspect of Hashem. So that would seem to be the case always. So how do we explain absolute evil? I mean, you have a Hitler who comes to the world, you have others. Clearly, from Hashem's perspective, there's goodness there, but clearly from our perspective, it's impossible to see anything good in what Hitler did or what others do. So that's the one side of it. The second part of it is the soul, in order to exercise itself and to grow and to realize its moral potential, must be able to exercise free will. And the question is, what about people who are unable to exercise free will, who are mentally challenged, some people say they come to this world to teach us things, and maybe it's part of the question of infinity. It gets given another role, another place, another role. And what about those who die very young, who are unable to exercise any free will? So then, how essentially does that soul get an opportunity to realize its potential?
Okay, it's a lot of questions. I'll try and answer them in order. The first question you asked is if the divine spark, the soul inside of us is godly, how does evil really exist? That is the unique reality of the world that God created. God created a very perfectly calibrated world, which allows this human being who has a godly soul to completely choose to avoid that godly consciousness, to even fight against that godly consciousness, and to live a life completely contrary to it. That's why there's value in our choices. If we didn't have that calibration, if we didn't have that balance, there'd be no value. If we were all living with the consciousness of our godly soul, then we would be angels. That's essentially what angels are. They're just these one-dimensional beings of godliness and connected to God. That's what they are. They're obvious agents of God. The human being has really, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, two souls. He has a godly soul and he has an animalistic soul. He has a godly leaning, a higher consciousness, and he has a lower consciousness. Which one we feed, which one we encourage, which one we allow to dominate becomes the choice of life. So that's really what it is. The question you're asking really should go to an even greater level. Since God is in everything, how can evil exist at all? This is the magic that God created. It has some very dark sides to that magic, but it gives life meaning in the sense that we have the ability to make choice. And that is exactly what we have to do. So yes, a person can deface and ruin their godly image to the point that it is completely removed from them. That's an idea in the Torah called kares. When a person sins to such a degree that their soul root gets cut off, the higher levels of their soul disconnect from the lower levels. The lower levels will eventually rot away and die. And the person usually dies before the age of 60. And that soul that goes back up is no more connected to the below experience. We can deface our tselem elokim, our godly image, and that is a tragedy when a person does choose to do that. But it's at the heart of the calibration of this world that we have the ability to ignore that. The next question you asked is, but what about somebody who doesn't have the choice? That 100%. Of course, even every baby doesn't have a choice. Whether it merits to live into maturity or not. As a baby, it doesn't have a choice. As a child, it doesn't have a choice. That's the stage of its development. At that stage, it's not held responsible. You could ask, why would God bring a being, a human, into this world and never give it choice? It's a very painful question.
That's the question.
That's a very painful question.
That's the key question. If you bring someone into this world and their purpose is to realize their moral potential.
We don't know what their purpose is. We don't know what their purpose is. We don't know what the purpose is. Somebody who is mentally handicapped and doesn't have the ability to make a choice and will develop physically but not emotionally will never be held responsible. We will see in them other purities. We will see in them other beauties. We will see in them wonderful things. But I cannot presume to speak for God and explain as to why God decided to bring that human being into the world. No, I know that He plays a role just like we do.
No, sorry, it wasn't that they don't have responsibility in a sense because they can't exercise it. The first question part is the purpose for sending someone who doesn't have that opportunity.
So I cannot speak to that purpose. I can suggest, I can presume, but I cannot speak authoritatively to the purpose of anybody. We have Hasidic stories that would suggest that sometimes the soul of a person who has to make up a little bit of perfection, something that it missed out of this world, might come down for a short while and inhabit the body for a little while, and then go back up after it had its perfection in this world, its innocence. That is a Jewish and Hasidic concept, and yes, so there would be some sort of value. I'm nervous. Sorry, let me finish. I'm nervous to get into it because I do not want to in any way come across as blasé or understanding of the tragedy of the reality you're talking about. It's tragedy. In our world, somebody who cannot really realize life. My cousin just lost his child at 3 months old. That's a tragedy. We could explain it from today till tomorrow. God clearly has a purpose for that pure soul's sojourn on this earth. But boy, must it hurt like hell. So I don't want to explain it and sort of make sense of it. But I do want to say that it must have had its need to be in this world for a certain amount of time, after which it was able to return. I'm going to move on to some other questions, if you don't mind. And you live down the road from me. So if you're not happy with it, with what I've said, we can continue the conversation on the boardwalk.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
I have another question.
Okay, well, since there's nobody else, oops.
The question is, if you talk about souls having the aspect of infinity or the quality of infinity, did Hashem actually create more than one soul?
So we are taught that God created 600,000 general souls. But those 600,000 general souls come from one soul. It comes from the soul of Adam. So of course it eventually goes back to one root. Yeah. The soul of Adam is the original prototypical soul of all souls, from which all souls and all subset of souls eventually develop, going through the generations from a different part of the physical structure of Adam, Adam Harishon, which is, by the way, a conglomerate of male, female. So for the women here, don't feel left out. Adam is a male, female being, upon which hang all neshamas of all time as a single unit, developed into 600,000 Jews who left Egypt as a prototypical number, and then dividing infinitely into all the souls of the Jewish people throughout Jewish history.
Rabbi Wineberg, do you see the question? How do you explain an out-of-body experience with regards to the soul?
Okay, very nice. So it's all my congregants. You're giving me a hard time, Rabbi Afton. Where are yours? Yours are being so nice to me.
Very polite. They never ask questions. They just say shkoyach rav, and it's all good.
Okay, so yeah, they do that. I know. I was joking for 10 years. You're right. They just say shkoyach. They're very nice. I love the question, and I love this one. I think, Marais, what you're speaking about, if I'm not mistaken, is like a near-death experience. Am I right? Somebody who's been at some sort of moment where they almost died and came back. Is that right? So what I suggested, look, that's a very interesting topic. I've dealt with it in a number of lectures and sermons. It's a fascinating area, and it certainly does point in a way to the soul. Myself and Rabbi Afson can collaborate in another lecture to get into it in detail if you want. But let me just say like this. The near-death experience is an indisputable thing. People have experienced it. It's been very well documented. What it means is another question. Some people say it's just a chemical reaction. Other people say it's actually the soul leaving the body, observing things at another level and coming back down. There's a lot to say for that approach. But let's say it is the soul leaving the body, experiencing things at a higher level and then coming back down. That's fine. Remember, there are many layers to your soul. So if your upper layers of your soul have left, but eventually come back down, it doesn't affect the lower levels, which were always part of your within your body. So since the soul is not a physical unit, it can be here and there because parts of it are still within your body. Even after we die, parts of the soul remain in our body. The lowest parts of nefesh and benefesh remain in our body. So the part of the elevated, the intellectual part of the soul has separated, but then for whatever reason, come back in. And that would be the spiritual explanation for a near-death experience. Okay? The next question we have here, and this is not my congregant, is why do we put MHD SRIP on the tombstone? Well, I remember as a new rabbi in Santon going to a consecration, and Rabbi Sushard, bless him, was out of town, and I was doing it, and there were these funny letters, and I'm like, whoa, what is that? His dear soul rest in peace. Okay, so you learn on the job, friends. It stands for may his or her dear soul rest in peace. And that is a very important idea in Judaism because we know that a neshama has to go through a journey. And that's what makes it so powerful in the relationship between us and our loved ones who pass away. We can help them on that journey by being there extension below, making changes and differences and real mitzvahs below. We help their neshama and propel them into a better space above. They need to go through a movement. It's another discussion, what happens and how and so on. But essentially, the soul is going through a process. We want that to be as peaceful as possible. So we express it on a tombstone that they should rest in peace.